Naxalite movement started in Naxalbari. But the ideological hub has always been Andhra Pradesh. And here I would like to make a disclaimer that when I mention the word Andhra Pradesh, so with this background, when Kondapalli Sitaramaya moved into the Telangana villages, already the agitated mind was there to agitate against the system for primarily three reasons: Jal, Jungle, and Jameen. The European background also. There was a Forest Act in 1827 in France. The 1827 Forest Act was the first act in the world in which the local forest inhabitants were asked to leave the forest, forgo their rights on the forest products. This was the reason, this was the cause which the PWG started here also. For an underground organization like this, the most important thing is weapon. What Mao said, your enemy is your quartermaster. But by 2000, 2001, 2, 3 onwards, the People's War Group and subsequently the Maoists, they were self-sufficient in tactics, strategy, resources, and execution of their plan.
HR division of the Maoists, what was that like?
The punchline comes, I think, from Lenin, who says that give me some money and few agitated mind, and I will give you a revolution.
We welcome our viewers once again to our podcast titled Risk and Resilience. Today we have a very interesting guest, a former Indian Police Service officer of the 1990 batch, Mr. Anjani Kumar. He was Director General of Police of Telangana till some time ago. He's recently superannuated. He had a long career in policing on the field, especially with regard to the really disturbed areas, the conflict region of the infested by the Maoists. He served with the Greyhounds on at least 3 times, once as the head and twice before as a younger middle management and then a junior officer right on the ground. He was a young man from the state of Bihar in the district of Gaya, which is now Jahanabad. Then he studied in Patna and then in Delhi and then got into the IPS 1990 batch. So a very interesting career. So he's here to basically talk to us about Maoism, and earlier it was known as Naxalism. So we will get into the real details of the whole story and how it started, where it was, where it is now. So welcome, Mr. Anjani. It is such a lovely experience to see you here again. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Safi. Pleasure to be here.
So we'll just dive straight in. And basically the first question that comes to my mind is going straight back to the origins of this whole thing. When the thing was known as the Naxalbari movement, it was essentially centered around West Bengal. So what was the philosophy of the movement? How did it start? Can you tell us something about its origins?
Yes, that's a very interesting question, I would say. When we talk of Marxism, the origin is much before Naxalbari movement. In fact, when India was seeing the British rule, Dalhousie was tightening his grip over India by the doctrine of lapse, and also the Anglo-Sikh War was at its peak. That was the time when Karl Marx wrote the Communist Manifesto. This was also the time when post-industrial revolution, the migration from European villages to cities were happening. And this was the time when these laborers were being exploited by the factory owners for more number of working hours and less salary. Karl Marx called it the working class. And that is how it started in Europe. Though in the first 10 to 15 years, about 7 to 10 countries, they had some kind of a revolution which couldn't succeed. And the world had to wait for 70 years when the Bolsheviks finally converted it into a successful revolution in Russia. So this was the background which was basically taken to India through various experts. The earlier beginnings were made by M.N. Roy, met Lenin, and that is how the ideological background to this movement started.
So this would be the phase between the First and the Second World War?
Yes.
Okay, then?
So after M.N. Roy came back to India, his efforts did not melt much ice. But when we see what was happening in the central India, That was more alarming. The general perception in India is that Naxalite movement started in Naxalbari, but the ideological hub has always been Andhra Pradesh. And here I would like to make a disclaimer that when I mention the word Andhra Pradesh, I mean the united Andhra Pradesh, not the present Andhra Pradesh and Telangana divided. In the late 40s, much before Charu Majumdar and Kanu Sanyal started their activities in Naxalbari, there was a thesis called Andhra Thesis, which was written by Nagi Reddy and D.V in Andhra Pradesh. This was the first attempt to Indianize the Marxist ideology, to convert it into a revolutionary movement. And the Andhra Thesis clearly mentions that the urban-centric Russian Revolution will not work in India, and unless and until the peasants are involved, the rural masses are involved, things would not move forward. And that was the beginning of left-wing extremist ideology in India. Subsequently, it was taken up by Kanu Sanyal and Charu Majumdar.
So the Marxist philosophy that was brought in by M. N. Roy and then written through this Andhra paper was eventually taken up by Kanu Sanyal and Charu Majumdar and centered in the Naxalbari area. Hence, it came to be known as Naxalism.
Yes, it came to be Naxalite. It came to be called Naxalite movement because the first violence took place there. When the Andhra Thesis was written in Andhra Pradesh, there was no violence, but the analysis was there. Whereas the first murder of a landlord by a peasant happened in Naxalbari. The first police opening of fire under the order of the local SDO happened in Naxalbari. And that is why it is called Naxalbari movement.
So the main philosophy at that time was protracted people's war. How did that eventually move into the concept of armed liberation struggle, and how did the name change from Naxalism to Maoism?
Oh, that's interesting. In fact, the concept of protracted war is not originally in the Marxian literature. If we see the Bolshevik Revolution, it was a very, very short period. Within a year, everything happened, perhaps much less than that. That's why it is also called the October Revolution. Mm. But when Mao tried to translate it into action in China, this period was very long period. It went into decades. There was a time when Mao was almost finished with a long march. He lost almost 80,000 of his soldiers. So the ups and downs in China gave Mao the idea that the war has to be a long war, a prolonged war. And that is why the term came protracted war. This was followed in India, not only by Charu Majumdar, Kanu Sanyal, but when they were discussing, they were also mentioning the tactics of Che Guevara, who has added a new dimension to the Marxian revolutionary philosophy of capturing the rural areas.
Okay. So what are the key differences between Naxal ideology and Marxist ideology as practiced in India?
First, the word Naxalism is primarily coined by the press.
Okay.
It is not a legal term in Marxian terminology.
Okay.
Because it started in Naxalbari, so it became Naxalbari and Naxalism. That is how. But the difference here is that in India, the difference between, say, Russian Marxism and Indian Marxism as understood by the militant wing is that in India, they decided that the class enemy is not the bourgeois only. The Marxian literature says that the bourgeois and the proletariat. But here they say that the main enemy is the oppressive state. That was the fundamental difference, which these people added a new value, a new dimension to the Marxian revolutionary ideology. So in India, the first target was the oppressive state and not the bourgeois landlords. In fact, they said that at many occasions you have to win them over. And that is why when we see the history of LW in India, there are many people who were landlords who became Naxalites.
Okay, very interesting. That's very interesting. So a key difference that you're making out is that in the earlier philosophy was that you had to target the landlords, the landed class, And in the new philosophy of Maoism, as was practiced recently, it was a war against the state, an armed liberation struggle.
The primary target was the state.
Okay, great. So now, in this time period between the movement from the Naxalbari region, from the Andhra Thesis to the Naxalbari region where it was actually practiced first time, how did it eventually move back to Andhra? And how did the leadership, which was with high caste people from Bengal, move back to the hands of high caste leadership in Andhra Pradesh? And one more clarification before we go there is that you mentioned the Andhra thesis. So at that time, Andhra was a part of the larger Madras state, no? Hyderabad, Madras state. Which regions was this coming up in? Is there any?
No, it was not part of the Madras presidency. As you know that the Nizam period, the Nizam area was the present Telangana plus some portion of Maharashtra and Karnataka. The other area were under the British rule. And so during the time when the Andhra thesis was written, it was basically under the British rule. But it was a very feudalistic society. Big land holdings were there. And that is how all these things, the situation was ripe enough.
Okay, so now how did the leadership move from Bengali high caste people to Andhra high caste people in the 70s, 80s, 90s?
If we see what happened in Naxalbari, that was a very interesting time. On the one hand, we see Jangal Santhal, Kanu Sanyal and Charu Majumdar trying to translate the Marxian doctrine of revolution to India. This was also the time when Jyoti Basu was the deputy chief minister. He was once 67 the finance minister, 69 the home minister also. And there was lot of negotiation, lot of effort because he knew the importance of left wing. He himself had studied it. In fact, it's very interesting thing that when he went to London to study, I think, to study law, but by chance he went to the talk by Harold Lasky. And one lecture, he says, changed his mind and he became a hardcore communist. When he came back, already there was left-wing thought process. Lot of things were happening in West Bengal. One stream went into the militant side. That is the Charu Majumdar and the other group. However, this effort by the militant group of left-wing could not do much because there were many tactical errors by them. The first thing which subsequently People's War Group improvised upon was that the Naxals, the early Naxals in West Bengal, they were operating in their own areas. So everybody knew who is who and where they can be found. As a result, within 1 year, it was crushed by the state and Charu Majumdar was arrested. He was found dead in the police station. Subsequently, Kanu Sanyal was also arrested and the entire movement fizzled away. But at the same time, in Srikakulam, which is at the border of Andhra, Odisha, there were uprising happened of similar nature was happening. To some extent, it was the byproduct of both Andhra thesis plus what Charu Majumdar and all had brought up. And as a result, new innovation at the field was happening. And Mr. B.N. Yugandhar, father of Satya, the CEO of Microsoft, he was the collector. And my first DG, Mr. Rodam Prabhakar Rao, was the SP at the later stage of the movement when it was almost getting over. So they started similar action of peasant rebellion, that land to the tillers, the famous slogan that whatever land the tillers are tilling, they should get the yield. This was also for about 3 to 4 years. And there was heavy use of central forces, almost...
Which years was this?
69 to 73, 74.
And this was coterminous with what was happening in the Naxal areas.
Yes, but Naxalbari was a very short-lived movement.
69, 70, 71.
Yes. Here it was longer period. Here it was longer period also because of the dense forest, because of the vastness of the area, lack of road, lack of communication. So it lingered for a very, very long period.
Okay, so the movements here you've explained very well, but how did the high caste ideologues of Andhra Pradesh
Very
develop
interesting.
into this?
Very interesting.
Why did the backward caste not come in?
I will go back to the origin of Marxism.
Hmm.
We always talk of Karl Marx. Whenever we mention of Karl Marx, we mention Friedrich Engels.
Hmm.
Karl Marx came from a humble background and didn't have much money, as we all know about that. He was borrowing money and reading literature at the British Museum in England. But Friedrich Engels was himself was a mill owner. And initially, all the agitation in Europe was against the mills. And it is said that Engels took all the money which he made as profit from the mills to propagate the Marxian ideology. So it is not only that in India, why a forward caste person was associated as a leader. The origin itself has been like that. And any new ideology, which is basically a byproduct of the society at any given time. When slavery was there in humankind, there were many enlightened people who had employed thousands of slaves, but they wrote against slavery. When feudalism was the economic activity of the Europe, there were many feudal serfs and lords who wrote against feudalism. Same thing with capitalism. When capitalism became very dirty and exploitative, big capitalists wrote against it. So ideology need not be something that if somebody is directly associated or affected, then only it will emerge.
So in the crop of leadership of the Maoists in the last 20 to 25 years, were there any well provided for rich people, the leaders who went into the Maoist movement, or were they all normal middle class, lower middle class type of people who went in?
There were certain people who were coming from the well-off family.
I'm talking of the leadership.
Yes. There were people. There were people who were doctors, who were engineers, who were teachers. So there are some people who are purely dedicated by the ideology.
Okay, so before we go into the organization and the resources of the Maoists, as we saw it in the last 20, 25 years, can you tell us the difference between the People's War, that People's War Group, the Maoist Communist Center, MCC, PWG, then their merger in 2004 into PW. Can you just tell us about these three names that get bandied about?
You see, if we see the spread of left-wing extremism in India, two theaters were hot simultaneously. The Central India, which in the Maoist parlance, they were also using the word DK for Dandakaranya, consisting of entire erstwhile Bastar, which is now in 5 districts, North Telangana, Andhra Odisha border. So this was one theater. The second theater was Bihar, Jharkhand, West Bengal. Subsequently, it spread to Nepal also. Both these theaters were active simultaneously. However, they had their own local factors affecting them. Say, for example, the place from where I come from. My village is in Jahanabad, Arwal area. Within a radius of 30 kilometers, there were 7 massacres from both the sides, either by MCC or some by the organization like Ranveer Sena. And each of these massacres, whether it is Lakhimpur Bathe, Dalirchak Baghora, and the death is not less than 40, 45, 50. This kind of massacres was not happening in the People's War Group area. Here it was very selective target, either what they call the Dora, the landlords, or the state government represented by the police, central paramilitary forces. So MCC had its, I would say, a color of caste associated with it, which was for a very, very long time untouched for People's War Group. The leadership, I would say, played a very important role. The founder of People's War Group, Kondapalli Sitaramaya, himself from Andhra area, from Krishna district. He studied the entire pattern of land holding and oppressive state nature very clearly. Secondly, when we talk of left-wing extremism in Andhra Pradesh, it has a background of revolutionary armed struggle during the Nizam period. During 1946 to 51, the Telangana armed agitation took place, which was primarily against the landlords by the peasants. It was so successful that almost 4,000 villages of the then united Andhra Pradesh was under their grip. I think Telangana now has about 12,000 villages. So you can understand what was the reach of these movements. Subsequently, when Hyderabad state got merged with the Union of India after Operation Polo, there was a lull in their activities because they thought that now their issues would be addressed by the government.
The merger was in
48.
48.
Yeah.
So 46 to 51 was the uprising. So
48 onwards, it was
46 to 48, it was at its peak,
Yeah.
4,000 villages under their control. And then 48 to 51, it started ebbing.
Yes.
Okay.
So with this background, when Kondapalli Sitaramaya moved into the Telangana villages, already the agitated mind was there to agitate against a system. To agitate against a system for primarily three reasons: Jal, Jungle, and Jameen. Land, water, and forest. So these were the three regions. If you go back to the European background also, there was a Forest Act in 1827 in France. The 1827 Forest Act was the first act in the world in which the local forest inhabitants were asked to leave the forest, forgo their rights on the forest products. This was the reason, this was the cause which the PWG started here also. When they tried to infiltrate into the tribal of Bastar and North Telangana, they were saying that your traditional rights to sell the forest produce, to live in the forest, to cut the trees whenever you want, all these things have been taken away by the government. And this was one of the reasons how they tried to agitate the tribals. I remember reading one of the early documents of confession when the People's War Group had one Agitprop committee, Agitation Propaganda Committee. They had sent the committee to Northeast whether they can have a parlance with the agitating people there with the PWG of North Telangana.
Okay. So how did they merge MCC and PWG?
It was a tactical masterpiece by Ganapati and also MCC. If you see the area, the period between 2001 to 2010, I would say this is the period when the Maoist violence peaked in India. Peak was, I would say, 2010, when first time the casualty figure crossed 1,000 in a year. So MCC was not capturing, but the sphere of influence was becoming bigger and bigger. Almost entire districts abetting the now Jharkhand and some abetting Nepal was under their influence. Because of the caste-ridden politics in Bihar, they were getting a lot of support in certain areas. All these massacres were there. This was the time when the famous Jahanabad jailbreak happened, in which the top 12 Ranveer Sena cadres were killed and about 300 Maoist cadres were taken away by the MCC. So the tactical relocation of their bases, it is there right from Che Guevara's time that the organization of the unit should be such that when the state oppression is high in one area, they should find a place to move to another. Secondly, the concept of liberated zone, though it is more mythical than reality, but they wanted to have a corridor. And that is how the mythical concept of Tirupati to Pashupati. Tirupati in Andhra Pradesh and Pashupati in Nepal. So it came. So this merger, when they started talking about this merger in 2003, actually it happened in 2004, the Dandakaranya, the Nalamala, and the South Nalamala touching up to uh, Tirupati, connecting the entire Bastar, then going to Madhya Pradesh, Jharkhand, Bihar, and to Nepal. So it became a very big corridor, almost taking almost more than 300 to 400 districts of the country was in their influence.
Okay. Very impressive. And I'm very impressed to see a police officer with so much of knowledge of history, of theory, of philosophy, and of practice. So you embody the perfect police officer. I'm sure your trainers in NPA would be very happy to hear all this. I believe you're still interested in horse riding.
No longer, but yes, I used to do once in a while.
I believe you were the star horse rider of your back. Say yes or no.
Yes, I got the Tong Cup. So.
Tong Cup.
Yeah.
What was that?
It's a princely estate in Rajasthan. So Maharaja of Tonk had given this rolling trophy, a silver trophy to NPA, which is given to the best horse rider of the batch.
So did they give you the easiest horse to ride?
No, it is by draw of lot.
Or were you one of the favorites of the teachers?
Well, some people say that, but
Okay, great. So this is excellent. It's very good knowledge. And we should now get to the organization of the Maoists in the last 20, 25 years. So how did they organize their party? I've heard that they had a Politburo, CCM, and some regional bureaus and various kinds of organizations. So can you just verbally show us a structure of how that was done?
Yes, but before I come to that, I would mention the organizational structure of the Maoist in India has been primarily what the structure was there of the People's War Group. After the 2004 merger, that was the time when, but I would like to add here something, that the Central Committee, the Politburo, the Regional Committee, they are the top bodies. But at the ground level, they were always changing the nomenclature. So it was like a PSYOP, an area, a person who is a Dalam commander, who is the leader of a squad with 15%, sometimes may go as a CO, as a central organizer to some other place. So in order to deceive the police about their rank, about their name, about their hierarchy, they keep changing it always. That is why you see every person will have 3-4 names. Ganapati is Muppal Lakshman Rao. These apex body always had 10 to 12, sometimes 20, 25 also. Right now, perhaps very few are left because in the last few years, they have lost almost their entire top cadres.
That I believe whenever one was neutralized, either were sent to jail or died, they were never able to replace that person. Why is that?
If you see 2009-10, up till that time, whenever they were losing a member, either a central committee member or a Politburo member, there were a lot of senior members with good number of experience in the field who could occupy the position. Subsequently, in the last 10 years, I would say, the amount of losses which the top leadership of Maoists have got, whether elimination in the exchange of fire or by surrender, they don't have anyone with that much of experience to substitute. That is the prime reason why there is absolute vacuum at the top level.
Okay. So these are the two top decision-making bodies. And on the ground level, there's something called PLGA. What was that?
PLGA started much later, People's Liberation Guerrilla Army. This is basically an import of the Chinese model from the People's Liberation Army there. When the Maoists in India gained strength militarily in the ground, they became from Dalam to, say, a company level, and from company to a battalion level. Though actual battalion was never there, but they were always claiming that they have a battalion. Particularly after the successful raids in Koraput and Dantewada and other places, which had not only given them good boost morally and in the field, but also technically because they got a lot of weapons. in one raid on an armory in Odisha had given them more than 1,000 automatic weapons. So then they spread into a bigger formation called the PNG.
Okay. So that's how it was structured. Now we come to the resources of this organization. So can you tell us something about their financing, their logistics, their communication networks?
For an underground organization like this, the most important thing is weapon. And what Mao said, your enemy is your quartermaster. And they followed this in letter and spirit in India. Most of the weapons what the Maoists have are looted from security forces, police, or other such agencies. Though initially they did make some small country weapon, katta type of a weapon in their own manufacturing unit. But I think their relevance is very, very less. As far as money is concerned, their operational area coincided with the area where a lot of mining activities are there. So a lot of contractors were giving them money under duress. At the peak of their sphere of influence, they were also collecting money from businessmen from cities. I remember even in the outskirts of Hyderabad and other places, the businessmen were getting letters and they were paying also earlier, say 10 years, 15 years before. And that was the main factor for their recruitment, because they were spending into recruitment. They were also investing. Some of the top cadres had invested in gold. They had also invested in real estate. So that is how they diversified.
So, but their main inflow of funds was essentially through extortion.
Yes.
And fear.
Hmm.
There was never any normal revenue stream or businesses, frontline businesses running the Maoist.
Not to the level that we can talk about.
And what about foreign influence?
Foreign influence, there has been references of interaction with the left-wing thinkers of Philippines and other places. There are also important couriers with some documents were seized earlier, in which they had mentioned that some trainers had come to talk to the trainers of People's War Group here in the central India. So there was association with that. But by 2000, 2001, 2, 3 onwards, the People's War Group and subsequently the Maoist, they were self-sufficient in tactics, strategy, resources, and execution of their plan.
Okay, so this was largely a self-sustained
Yes.
terrorist movement in India.
Absolutely, absolutely. In fact, yesterday when I was coming to Delhi, just before that, somebody saw a movie, Dhurandhar, and he was mentioning about a particular scene in which a person is beheaded and his severed head was, as a trophy, was taken away by one of the character in the movie. So it reminded me of one of the literature earlier, which during Kondapalli Sitaramayya's time, a so-called Dora, a landlord, was beheaded in front of the entire village, and how this intimidation and fear leading to terror for submission as a tactics was used by the Maoists. In fact, they were not the first. It happened much before. If we see what happened in 1857 revolt, when the 2 sons of Bahadur Shah Zafar was beheaded and the heads were offered to the emperor who was in captivity. When the Battle of Succession, Aurangzeb killed his own brother and in an ornate box gave the severed head to his imprisoned father. So fear in order to submit has been always there in the past. The Maoists took it to the highest level.
Okay, and what about the, how did they attract more people into their organization, especially given the really harsh conditions of the forest? And then how did they keep them there? What was the HR division of the Maoists? What was that like?
The punchline comes, I think, from Lenin, who says that give me some money and few agitated mind, and I will give you a revolution. They had the money, and definitely there were agitated minds. The concept of welfare state, which is now very much there, this was the fashionable keyword for Maoists 20 years back. And perhaps 20 years back, if what the government is doing now, if it was done then, Maoists would have found it difficult to operate. So there were areas which were neglected. The entire district of Dantewada perhaps had only one cell tower. Now perhaps it has 2,000. Road access, RTC buses, primary health facility, all these things were not existing earlier. So it has been a multi-pronged approach from the government, and hot to hot, cold to cold.
What does that mean?
The armed dalam had to be neutralized in the forest. A person moving with weapon, not ready to surrender, rather who is planning to put an IED under the vehicle of a security force. What is the way? The only way is to neutralize them militarily. But those who are coming out and surrendering, trying to join the mainstream, so they have to be accommodated by the best possible rehabilitation scheme, jobs, skill imparting, and so on.
So is this a quote that will go to your name? Hot to hot, cold to cold?
It came out just like that, but yes,
So then
in reality, that is the thing.
50 years later, researchers can quote you to say, as Mr. Anjani Kumar said. So what was the communication strategies that they used, given that in the pre-mobile phone era and post-mobile phone era, where there were no towers?
In fact, that brought a quantum jump in our approach, I would say. Pre-cell phone era was an era in which the Maoist had an edge. I will give an example. When we were ASP in a subdivision called Jangaon in Warangal, which was the hotbed of People's War Group then, there was an informant who was moving with the Dalam, with the armed squad. But there was no way he could communicate, because the Maoist used to follow the tactics that if somebody is with them, he will be with them. He will not be allowed to go out unless and until they go deep into the forest. And once the group goes deep into the forest, even then this person has to walk for about 10 kilometers, 15 kilometers to the nearest telephone booth to inform the police officer whom he is reporting to. By that time, the Maoist would go some 20 kilometers in any of the 360-degree direction. It was a big handicap there. It is also related to the period when, if you see, cell phone commercially started coming up in 96, 97. And little 5 years, if we move ahead, 2003-4 was also the period when in Andhra Pradesh, in the United Andhra Pradesh, the then government gave them, the Maoist, an option of come out and talk. There was a period of talk with YSR government in 2004. And the talk had to fail because government gave all the options to them, but the Maoists basically wanted to use it as a propaganda, and they never wanted to leave their weapon. Subsequently, when the talk failed, if you see within the next 6 months, there were excellent exchange of fire leading to elimination of top cadres. It is only because of the tower analysis, the dump analysis. So it exposed their movement. It removed the cover of secrecy in the forest. And if at all their couriers were coming to the cities, they were falling into our trap.
Okay, so very interesting. Now you're moving towards the operation side, the counter-terror operations that were undertaken. So it is often said that in some states, the operations did not happen because possibly the highest government functionary was not interested or didn't think it was much of a threat. Whereas in some states, a higher government functionary felt that, yes, it must be done. So it started. So were counter-terror operations organized at state level? Were they politically organized in the sense that the government functionary said only then they were organized? Or there was something that the district SPs did on their own?
You see, first I would like to mention the theater, how it was operating. The left-wing extremist or the Maoist in India, they were basically, there's no geographical boundary for them. The state boundary, the district boundary, these are all government terminology. For them, whether it is the Khammam district south of Godavari or north of Godavari, Bastar, it is the same for them. And for almost 20 years, they took advantage of this. I would also like to mention here the gaps in the political setup which the Maoists exploited. There was a time, say about perhaps 20 years ago, one of the chief minister called them as a patriotic, misguided brethren. There was a time when ban was imposed, bans were lifted, again bans were imposed, they were lifted. They took advantage of this lack of consistency. And not only recruitment and money collection, but it gave a wrong picture to the society also. But when my reading is that in any state, when the two primary political party decided that they cannot share the space, whether it is political space or otherwise, with the Maoist, then the decline started. In Andhra Pradesh, both the leading party, the TDP and the Congress, one day realized that it is not possible to live with the Maoist. And thereafter, the decline was very rapid.
Okay, great. That's a fairly good explanation. So thank you so much. Then in the counter-terror operations all over India, if you see the kind of operations taking place, would you think that the intelligence agencies played some role in all this?
As chief of Greyhounds, I would say that there were two kinds of operations which Greyhounds were doing. First was area domination. And many times, while dominating the area, there used to be chance encounter or chance exchange of fire. What was also more important is what is called the intelligence-led operation, the SIB of the United Andhra Pradesh. They had the best wherewithal. They were tracking all the movements. In fact, many neutralization of top cadre in West Bengal, in Jharkhand, in Bastar, in Maharashtra have happened with the input of the SIB, the state SIB of Hyderabad. So intelligence did play a very important role. Subsequently, when we had to coordinate with what is happening in West Bengal and Jharkhand and other places, the central agency, the IB, was also coordinating it. A lot of inputs was coming from one state to another through IB. So it definitely helped us.
So you mentioned you were head of Greyhounds, and one is aware that you've served in Greyhounds as a young officer also. So what was the reason why a focused force called Greyhounds was created and the problem was not left to district SPs? What was the whole story behind it? And then how did it operate?
I would give that credit to a legendary police officer, Mr. K.S. Vyas. Unfortunately, he was killed by the Naxalite in 93 when we were ASP. So the period before the formation of Greyhound, 89 was the year when Greyhound was raised. So 87, 88, 89 was the period when the inadequacy of the conventional policing was seen in combating left-wing extremism. They were not trained to go into what is called the jungle warfare. They were doing so many things. And as you know, in police, law and order and other duties will always take priority over anti-Naxalite operation, for which one has to go into the forest. The local thanedar will be will have too many things on his hand. Investigation, VIP visit, going to for a communal situation, all those things. So how do you expect a person to be also doing a combing operation in the forest? Mr. Vyas brought an expert, a consultant called Mr. Bhati, who got Padma Shri by the government of India. And I would say he's the real guru drone for combating left-wing extremism in India. Under him,
who is Mr. Bhati?
Mr. Bhati is an ex-SSB officer and who was hired as consultant by the government of then United Andhra Pradesh. He died just last year.
He was a person with police and intelligence experience.
Everything.
Everything.
He was what is called the anti-guerrilla operation personified. And all credit to the political leadership of Andhra Pradesh, whoever was the chief minister. They never tinkered with this. Every IPS officer recruited into the cadre of United Andhra Pradesh had to undergo 3 months of Greyhounds training. Every sub-inspector who was recruited had to go 3 months of training. Similarly, when constables are recruited, first the team of selectors from Greyhounds will go to the police training college and select the best of lot to become commando in the Greyhounds. So government gave full freedom, operational freedom of recruitment, training, 60% incentive, and lot of freedom to the chief of Greyhounds. And that is how it evolved as a counter guerrilla force. What they say that if you have to fight a gorilla, you have to become a gorilla. And that is how Greyhounds, I remember one of the early codes, tough terrain is the soldier's path. Whenever they went into the forest, what was happening earlier, officers and men were tempted to go on the beaten track. And as a result, Claymore mine, IEDs were exploding. Greyhounds never takes those paths. They have to either go cross country, or if they have to take a vehicle, then it will be so secretive that nobody would know that the Greyhound team is going in that.
Okay. So that is how the Greyhounds survived, moved on. You showed us who the leading lights were. So other states must have also created their forces.
Yes, on the pattern of Greyhound, the first response was by the CRPF, and one of our former Andhra officer, Mr. Durga Prasad, went to CRPF and he raised the Cobra. Cobra is nothing but how the Greyhound operates, and the first lot of all the officers of Cobra were trained by Greyhound. Similarly, Jharkhand had raised a force called Jaguar, and almost every unit affected by LWE menace, they were trained by Greyhounds.
So you are kind of proving the fact that any local insurgencies which start off in a region, like in Punjab, then in United Andhra Pradesh, and in Kashmir, all of them were started in that region and countered successfully eventually by police forces of that very state or region.
100%. No insurgency, revolution, agitation, or armed rebellion can be first understood better than the local police. The information generated by the local police station, the connectivity of the village to the police station and higher ups, these are the foundation for any counter guerrilla operation. And that is why I would say that Punjab terrorism was crushed by Punjab police with the aid of CRPF and others. But the primary role was Punjab police. Similarly, the Maoist problem in Andhra Pradesh was curbed by Andhra police, the United Andhra police. And same thing is happening in Bastar and Odisha.
Okay, so a fair bit of discussion we've had on the India situation. So you mentioned that the Che Guevara movement was to some extent a kind of forebear or kind of ideology provider for the Maoist movement. So are there any similarities between the way the Maoists operated, their tactics, with say ISIS, with Al Qaeda, with any of these international terrorist organizations?
You see, the ideology is different. So on the ideological platform, there would not be any similarity between, say, what Taliban is doing, Al Qaeda is doing, or a Marxist organization is doing. But at the operational level, the field level, the tactical level, there are many things which they have learned from each other. When 79 first time the Soviet army moved into Afghanistan, heavy tanks moved from the what is called the Salan Highway. It was basically an infantry battle. And first time in the modern age, they realize the futility of infantry war, in which heavy artillery guns are used against a very small operating guerrilla unit, which will attack and run away, go and hide in the hills of Tora Bora. What happened to the Russian army, we all know. Coincidentally, 2003, 4, 5, when the Maoist movement was at its peak in India, this was the time when America was sending maximum troops to Afghanistan. And if you see the engagement there, the discussion which various articles have mentioned, that initially they also got checkered by the number game. Whenever there was a loss of American soldier, they used to pump in 500 extra soldiers, which is again not the not the correct way to handle. And as a result, you see when America withdrew, within 15 days, Kabul fell. So these were the tactical mistakes which any army would commit when they are combating a small enemies, small group, a small unit. Uh, One can draw parallel of, say, when Shivaji was attacking Aurangzeb, any big army trying to attack a smaller unit would find these problems. And Che Guevara, or for that matter, slight deviation from Maoist tactics was what is called the Lin Piao group. Lin Piao was again a colleague of Mao, but an expert in guerrilla warfare. And he gave the idea to India and the Indian revolutionary that focus more on the rural areas, the hinterland. And the more number of operational units you have here, there was a time when People's War Group had 800 arms unit. The MCC of India in Bihar and Jharkhand had almost 700 armed unit. So these were all inspired by what is called the best tactics of either Che Guevara or Lin Piao or Mao, which was operating here. So it's very difficult to theorize it because it was evolving depending on how things are, how their enemy, that is us, how we are evolving our tactics. And that is how it kept on evolving over a period of time.
I would really request you to write a book on the way you saw Maoist, how the Maoists developed from the Naxal movement, which was called the Naxal movement, and what Marx gave it. Very interesting. Your information is very good. So you've been talking a lot about the army. So the question that comes to mind is that why didn't the Indian government or the state governments ever use the Indian army to deal with this problem?
Yes, most of us think that way. But I read a very interesting article just before the Indo-Pak War of 71, the liberation of Bangladesh. Then Lieutenant General Sam Manekshaw, he was asked by the government to get involved into checking the Naxalite movement in West Bengal. And there is a reference to this incident by none other than General Jacob, who writes that Secretary Narayan and Sam Manekshaw, who was Lieutenant General, came to Calcutta to discuss how and in what way army can be utilized to combat Naxalite movement. There was also a code name given to the operation called Operation Steeplechase. So it has been used in the past, not that it has never been used. However, I feel that the best way to tackle this is to train the local police, what each of the states have.
The way you explained.
Yes.
Okay, great. Now that the Maoist movement is almost said to be dead, or it's in the last 1 or 2 years, almost all if not 90+% have surrendered. Most of its top leadership has been neutralized. So do you think they will ever come back? Is it dead?
So that as far as the difference between the bourgeois and the proletariat will remain, as far as the nature of oppression may change, but if the one group feels oppressed, then some kind of resistance will come up in one form or the other. But as a democratic country, we would be very happy if the opposition which is coming is unarmed. So that serves the purpose, and I think the present trend is in that direction, that even if there is some agitation, it would be unarmed.
Okay, so the removal of the armed part is what has been achieved, and that's a great achievement.
That is the biggest achievement, yes.
So now coming towards the end, the last question. Whenever these massive operations happen against any insurgents group or any criminals or anything, there are always complaints of human rights violations. So how did you, in your experience, see that whole thing? And what is the right about it? What is the wrong about it? Can you please expound on that?
It's a very relevant question. Whenever any operation is launched, for that matter, much before that, as part of the training itself, whether it is Greyhounds training, whether it is any other specialized training by a district police or specialized agency, a very good portion of the training is given to about the legality of all the operations. So, number one, that we are never given the authority to bypass the local police or the local administration. Whenever Greyhounds goes into a forest, into an area, the local SP is taken into confidence. The local input is also taken, whether there are some certain things which the Greyhound should be aware of. Secondly, when you are going inside the forest with anticipation that you may be fired upon, there are certain degree of alertness and prompt response, which is very much mandated. Now, intentionally, I don't think anybody, any trained commando of Greyhounds, or for that matter, any specialized agency, would go and kill an innocent. Never it can happen. By accident, it may have happened at certain places, but for that, there are legal remedies. There has been judicial inquiries. There has invariably, every exchange of fire is under the inquiry is conducted by a magistrate. And there have been cases in which officers have been punished. So all necessary care has always been taken. And the aim is never to either harass or even hurt any innocent person.
But like in the current wars that are going on in the rest of the world, where the very convenient term has been used, oh, it's collateral damage. That is not what
I don't think that word is ever used in LWE in India.
Or in India at all?
Never, never.
Good. That's a good tradition. And the kind of problems that police officers face when they work.
In fact, I would like to say that is why if you go to a village in United Andhra Pradesh, how popular Greyhound is. They all see Greyhound as their savior. It's only because they know that they are very careful in their operation. They are always alert about ensuring that no innocent is harmed.
Excellent. So it's been a fascinating conversation, Mr. Anjani Kumar, and the country is grateful for all your services. And let us hope in a few episodes from now, we shall invite you again.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Pleasure talking to you.